The surveillance footage was crystal clear, but the rival gangs in Seoul thought it was a deep fake. Park Tae-sung, the man who'd built a criminal empire on the bones of his enemies, was doing something impossible. He was grocery shopping. He wasn't sending a subordinate. He wasn't ordering delivery. He was actually pushing a cart through a local supermarket, his tattooed neck tight with focus, while an elderly black woman, dressed in a simple floral housecoat, pointed at items and nodded approvingly. Behind them, 4 of the most dangerous hitmen in South Korea stood guard, over a pile of tomatoes. The rival gangs watching from the shadows couldn't believe their eyes. Some laughed. They saw a man who had gone soft. But one man, Choi Dae-jung, known as the Viper, leaned forward and smiled. "Find out everything about that old woman," he whispered. "The devil just showed us his only weakness." What the Viper didn't know was that he was looking at the woman who had saved a starving immigrant boy 30 years ago in Los Angeles. The woman who taught him that kindness existed in a cruel world. The woman Park Tae-sung had searched for with 15 years and millions of dollars, only to be told she was dead. And she'd just walked back into his life through the most unexpected door imaginable. She was the grandmother of his terrified housemaid, brought to the mansion on the worst night possible. But here's what nobody saw coming. That reunion would expose a traitor within Park's organization, trigger a war that would shake Seoul's underworld, and prove that the devil is never more dangerous than when he's protecting someone he loves. This is a story about blood debts, impossible choices, and the unbreakable bonds that transcend everything. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. And if you love stories about unexpected connections and powerful life lessons, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Keisha Williams had mastered the art of invisibility. For 8 months, she'd worked as a housemaid in the Hanam-dong mansion, gliding through rooms like a ghost, cleaning around armed men who never looked at her twice, was learning to disappear into the walls whenever Park Tae-sung's black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. The other staff whispered warnings during her first week. Never make eye contact. Never speak unless spoken to. Never, ever bring anyone to this house. Mr. Park doesn't do visitors. The last maid who'd accidentally left the service gate unlocked? She was gone within the hour. Nobody asked where. But on this particular Thursday evening, at 11:47 p.m., Keisha's carefully constructed invisible life shattered with a single phone call. "Miss Williams?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Park from Sunny Day's care home. "I'm so sorry to call this late, but your grandmother, she had an episode. She tried to leave the facility. We found her 3 blocks away in her nightgown, confused and distressed. The doctor says we can't safely keep her anymore. You need to make other arrangements immediately." Keisha's hands went numb. "Other arrangements? Mrs. Park, I understand this is difficult, but we have liability concerns. You have until tomorrow evening to find alternative care." The line went dead. Keisha stood in her tiny staff room staring at her phone, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Her grandmother's dementia had been getting worse, but Sunny Days was the only facility she could afford. Everything else required deposits she didn't have, waiting lists that stretched for months. She pulled up her bank account, 340,000 won. Barely enough for 2 weeks at the cheapest nursing home, and that was before food, medication, emergency transport. And her apartment, the one-room unit she'd rented before taking this job, had been condemned 4 months ago. The landlord had never fixed the mold problem. She'd been sleeping here at the mansion ever since, grateful for the bed, but always aware she was one mistake away from homelessness. Outside her window, Seoul glittered like a jewelry box full of opportunities she couldn't touch. The next morning, Keisha called 17 care facilities, 17 variations of the same answer. "We're at full capacity." Our rates start at $3,000,001 per month. We don't accept crisis placements. Try calling back in 6 months. By 4 p.m., she was standing in Sunnyday's lobby, watching her grandmother Ruth sit in a wheelchair, humming an old gospel song, her eyes clouded with confusion. "Ready to go home, sweet girl?" Ruth asked, smiling up at her. Keisha's throat closed. "Yes, Grandma. Let's go home." She had no plan, no backup, just her grandmother, a small overnight bag, and the growing certainty that she was about to make a catastrophic decision. The drive back to the mansion felt like driving toward the edge of a cliff. Every red light was a chance to turn around. Every turn brought her closer to a disaster she couldn't unsee. But where else could she go? At 9:30 p.m., she used her service key to enter through the kitchen. The mansion was quiet. Mr. Park was out on business, which everyone knew meant something violent and better left unquestioned. The main staff had left for the night. She had maybe 4 hours before the morning shift arrived. "Just for tonight," she whispered to herself, helping her grandmother up the service stairs. "Just until I figure something out." She settled Ruth in her small staff room, gave her medication, waited until her grandmother drifted into sleep. Then Keisha did what she did best. She disappeared back into her work, cleaning the guest wing with mechanical precision while her mind raced through tomorrow's problems. She was polishing the banister on the second floor when she heard it. Singing. Soft, melodic, drifting up from the main floor. An old hymn her grandmother used to sing in their church in Atlanta, back when Keisha was small and the world was simpler. "No," Keisha breathed, dropping her cloth. "No, no, no." She ran. Ruth Williams had lived through 78 years of remarkable experiences. The civil rights movement, raising a daughter alone, burying a husband, immigrating to Korea to be near her granddaughter. But dementia had turned her mind into a maze where past and present tangled like yarn. Tonight, she'd woken up thinking she was back in her Atlanta apartment, back when little Keisha was 5 and needed checking on. She'd wandered out of the unfamiliar room, down hallways that seemed too grand, too cold, searching for something familiar. The mansion's main hall caught her attention. Specifically, the leather chair by the fireplace that reminded her of the one in her old church. She sat down, her bones grateful for the rest, and began humming. Waiting, in that fractured way, dementia makes you wait. For someone who existed only in memory. That's where she was when the front doors exploded inward. Park Tae-sung stormed into his mansion like a hurricane made of violence and expensive cologne. His black Armani suit was torn at the shoulder. Blood, someone else's, splattered across his shirt. His knuckles were split and raw from the negotiation he'd just concluded with a trafficking ring that thought they could operate in his territory without paying tribute. Behind him, 6 bodyguards filed in, weapons visible, faces grim. Tonight had been messy, the kind of messy that required cleanup crews and careful disposal. "Get Dr. Lee," Park barked at his head of security, Hwang Ji-hoon, "and burn these clothes, everything." He was already unbuttoning his ruined shirt when he stopped mid-stride. Someone was sitting in his chair. In his private residence. In his sanctuary. The one place in Seoul where he could shed his armor and exist without performance. But there sat an elderly black woman with silver hair, wearing a faded purple cardigan, humming something soft and spiritual. Completely unaware that 6 laser sights had just painted her chest with targeting dots. Park's hand moved to his waistband on pure instinct. "Who the hell?" "Grandma!" Keisha's scream cut through the moment like a knife through silk. She came running from the second floor, her footsteps frantic on marble, her cleaning apron flying behind her. She didn't calculate, didn't think about her job, her safety, her future. She threw herself over her grandmother, wrapping her body around Ruth like a human shield, her arms spread wide, her face turned toward Park Tae-sung with a mixture of terror and defiance. Please, Keisha sobbed. Please, Mr. Park, don't hurt her. She has dementia. She doesn't understand where she is. The nursing home expelled her, and I had nowhere else to take her. I know I broke the rules. I know I shouldn't have brought her here. Just please, I'm begging you, don't hurt my grandmother. The hall went silent except for Keisha's crying and Ruth's confused murmuring. It's okay, baby girl. Why are you crying? Park stood frozen, his weapon half drawn, his eyes locked on the old woman's face. The bodyguards waited. One word from their boss and this would be over. Clean. Professional. Nobody would ask questions. Hwang Ji-hoon, his head of security, had his finger on the trigger, waiting for the nod. But Park wasn't moving. He was staring at Ruth with an expression his men had never seen before. Something that looked like recognition, like shock, like a ghost had just walked through his walls. His lips moved, forming words that wouldn't come. The weapon slipped from his fingers, clattering against marble. Then Park Tae-sung, the devil of Seoul, the man who'd ordered executions over breakfast and dismantled rival organizations before lunch, did something impossible. He fell to his knees. Halmione, he whispered, his voice cracking like breaking glass. You're alive. The bodyguards exchanged glances. They'd served Park Tae-sung for years, had seen him torture informants, had watched him walk away from explosions without flinching, had witnessed him break men with his bare hands. They'd never seen him cry. But tears were streaming down his face now, cutting tracks through the blood spatter on his cheeks. Ruth squinted at him, her clouded eyes trying to focus. Keisha remained frozen over her grandmother, her mind unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. The devil didn't cry. He didn't kneel. Tae-sung? Ruth's voice was soft, wondering. Is that you, baby? The sound of his name from her lips broke something fundamental in Park. He crawled forward. Actually crawled, his expensive suit dragging across marble, until he reached her feet. He buried his face in her weathered hands, his entire body shaking with sobs that seemed torn from somewhere ancient and buried. Halmione, he choked out. I looked for you. For 15 years I looked for you. They told me you were dead. They told me everyone from Los Angeles was gone in the fires. Shh, Ruth murmured, her fingers instinctively moving to stroke his hair. Something in her fractured memory was clicking into place. I'm here now, child. I'm here. Hwang Ji-hoon lowered his weapon slowly, his professional mask cracking. Boss? He ventured carefully. Park raised one hand, a small gesture, but absolute in its authority. The laser sights vanished. Weapons were holstered. The men stepped back, trying desperately to unsee what they'd just witnessed. Because the man weeping at an old woman's feet wasn't the devil of Seoul. He was just a boy who'd lost everything. And somehow, impossibly, he'd just found a piece of it back. Keisha's voice came out barely above a whisper. Mr. Park, do you know my grandmother? Park looked up, his eyes red, his face transformed by grief and wonder. Know her? He laughed, a broken, incredulous sound. She saved my life. Los Angeles, 1995. Koreatown. My uncle brought me to America with promises of opportunity. I was 8 years old. Didn't speak English. Didn't understand why my parents had sent me away with this man who smelled like cigarettes and violence. The opportunity turned out to be running drugs for his gang. I was small, innocent-looking, perfect for deliveries. When I tried to refuse, he locked me in a closet for 2 days without food. So I learned to be useful. I learned to be invisible. I learned that survival meant swallowing your humanity piece by piece until nothing was left. One day, I stole an apple from a corner store. I was starving. My uncle hadn't fed me in 3 days, punishment for being too slow on a delivery. The store owner chased me into an alley where 3 older boys were waiting. Neighborhood kids who'd decided I was an easy target. "Go back to where you came from, you chink bastard." They kicked me, punched me. I curled into a ball and took it, and because fighting back only made it worse. I thought I was going to die in that alley. Another immigrant kid who disappeared and nobody cared. Then I heard it. Crack. A wooden cane hitting pavement so hard it echoed off the walls. "You get away from that child right now, or so help me God. I will call every mother in this neighborhood and you won't sit down for a week." The boys scattered like roaches. And there she was. This black woman in her 50s, church hat slightly crooked, cane raised like a sword, eyes blazing with righteous fury. Behind her, a little girl peeked out nervously. "That was you, Keisha. You were maybe 5 years old, holding your grandmother's purse." Ruth Williams didn't ask questions, didn't call the police, didn't turn me over to social services. She took me home. Her apartment was tiny, 2 rooms above a dry cleaner in a neighborhood that most people avoided. But it smelled like heaven, like soup and cornbread and safety. She fed me, bandaged my wounds, let me sleep on her couch while little Keisha brought me her stuffed rabbit to hold because it helps when you're scared. I stayed for 3 months, best 3 months of my life. Halmione taught me to read English using her Bible. Made me wash behind my ears. Insisted I say grace before meals. Told me I was worthy of love even when the world said otherwise. Every morning she'd make breakfast and we'd eat together. Her, little Keisha, and me. A family, even if it was temporary. Even if it was built on borrowed time. She never asked me about my uncle. Never pushed. Just gave me space to be a child again. Then my uncle came back. I heard his voice through the door one evening. "There's the little bastard. Come on, we're going home." "Home?" Halmione stood in the doorway blocking him. "This boy has bruises on his ribs and fear in his eyes. You're not taking him anywhere until I talk to—" My uncle shoved past her, grabbed me by the arm hard enough to leave fingerprints. I screamed for her. Reached back toward that tiny apartment as his car pulled away, Halmione running after us down the street, her cane forgotten, little Keisha crying on the sidewalk. "I'll find you again, Halmione," I sobbed. "I promise." But Korea swallowed me whole. My uncle dragged me back to Seoul to the family business. Turned out the opportunity in America had been a test. I'd proven I was useful. Now it was time to become profitable. By 15, I was running guns. By 20, and I was killing rivals. By 30, I was the one giving orders. And Halmione? I searched for her. Spent millions. Hired private investigators. Tracked down everyone who'd lived in Koreatown in 95. Then came the fires of 97. Whole blocks burned. Records destroyed. People scattered. I found a death certificate with her name. Found reports that said she'd died in the chaos. I mourned her. The only mother I'd ever known. Gone. Until tonight. Until you, Keisha, broke the rules and brought her back to me. The mansion changed overnight. Park called an emergency meeting of his entire organization at 3 a.m. Every lieutenant, every captain, every soldier who'd pledged loyalty to him. They assembled in the main hall, confused and nervous. Emergency meetings usually meant war. Someone had betrayed them. Someone was dead. Park stood at the top of the stairs, his shoulder bandaged from the earlier fight, his expression unreadable. "This woman," he gestured to where Ruth sat, still confused but calm, Keisha beside her, "is my Halmione, my grandmother in every way that matters. She is family. She is protected under my name." The men shifted uncomfortably. They'd heard rumors about the old woman who'd somehow appeared in the boss's house. Some had even joked about it. From this moment forward, Park's voice dropped to something cold and absolute. Anyone who disrespects her, anyone who threatens her, anyone who looks at her wrong answers to me personally. And I promise you, it will be the last mistake you ever make." He let that sink in. Hwang Ji-hoon, step forward. His head of security obeyed, his face carefully neutral. "You aimed a weapon at her tonight," Park said quietly. "You're done. Pack your things. If I see you in Seoul by morning, they'll find pieces of you in the Han River." Hwang's face went white. "Boss, I didn't know." "You're dismissed." Hwang wisely chose survival. He was gone within minutes. Park turned to his remaining men. "Does anyone else need clarification on where Halmione stands in this organization?" The silence was absolute. "Good. Meeting over." The days that followed were surreal. The master suite was transformed into a palace fit for royalty. New bedding, medical equipment, a button by the bed that would summon Park himself if needed. Keisha was moved into the guest wing, a room larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a view of Seoul that took her breath away. The staff whispered in confusion, and the devil had gone soft. The world was ending. But the real shock came during breakfast 3 days later. Park was on the phone, barking orders. "I don't care if he's the mayor's cousin. Break his kneecaps and..." Thwack. Ruth's cane connected with his shoulder. "Language," she snapped. "We are eating." The entire dining room went silent. The bodyguards by the door stopped breathing. Park Tae-sung, the man who'd once murdered a prosecutor for interrupting his dinner, rubbed his shoulder and mumbled, "Sorry, Halmione." "And sit up straight. You look like a street thug." "Yes, Halmione." Keisha bit her lip to keep from laughing. Across the table, even the stone-faced butler's mouth twitched. That evening, Ruth made Park eat his vegetables. Actually stood there and watched until he finished every piece of broccoli on his plate. In the devil of Seoul, terror of the underworld, pouting at steamed vegetables while his grandmother nodded in approval. "Good boy," Ruth said, patting his cheek. And Park, impossibly, smiled. For 2 weeks, peace reigned. Park discovered what it meant to have family again. To come home to questions about his day. To be scolded for working too late. To have someone worry about him without wanting something in return. Keisha discovered what it meant to be seen, not as a maid, but as a sister. Park made sure she ate at the family table, not with the staff. Made sure she had everything she needed. Protected her the way he protected his own blood. And Ruth, in her fractured way, was happy. The mansion felt familiar somehow. The boy who held her hand during walks reminded her of someone important, even when she couldn't remember exactly who. But the city had eyes, and the city had been watching. Choi Dae-jung, the Viper, studied the surveillance photos spread across his desk. Park Tae-sung helping an old woman into a car. Park Tae-sung carrying grocery bags. Park Tae-sung pushing a wheelchair through a park, actually smiling. 20 years, the Viper murmured. 20 years Park Tae-sung has been untouchable. No family, no friends, no weaknesses. And then this. He tapped the photo of Ruth with one perfectly manicured finger. Find out everything about her. Where she came from. Why Park cares. And then. He leaned back in his chair, already calculating angles. And then we take her. His lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. Boss? Kidnapping Park Tae-sung's grandmother? That's brilliant, the Viper interrupted. Park has spent 2 decades building an empire on fear, making everyone too terrified to touch him. But fear has a weakness. It requires consistency. The moment people see him as human, see him as vulnerable, the whole structure starts to crack. He stood, walking to the window overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. We don't just take the old woman, we make it public. We show the underworld that the devil bleeds, that he can be hurt, that he's weak. And then? The Viper smiled. And then we take everything he's built, his territory, his operations, his legacy. All of it crumbles the moment they see him beg. The attack plan was elegant in its simplicity. Multiple entry points, maximum chaos. A team of 30 professionals, the best mercenaries money could buy, hitting the mansion during shift change when security would be weakest. The goal wasn't to kill Park Tae-sung. The goal was to take his grandmother alive and parade his weakness before the entire criminal underworld. What the Viper didn't know was that Park had been expecting this, had been preparing for it since the moment he saw that first surveillance car. Because Park Tae-sung hadn't survived 20 years in this business by being careless, and he certainly wasn't about to lose his family a second time. The storm was coming. And when it broke, Seoul would learn an important lesson. The devil only seems weak when he's protecting something. That's when he's most dangerous. What happens next will shock you. Will Park's love for his grandmother be his downfall? Or will it become his greatest strength? Will the Viper succeed in exposing Park's weakness? Or will he discover that some bonds are stronger than fear? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And if this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for part 2, where everything explodes. Because trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Until next time, stay legendary.